Hello, and welcome to Simplified Security episode number 3. This is actually a special interview with a special guest, which I'm about to introduce you to. But do check out the podcast, which is on various different platforms, where I have featured some parts of this interview in the podcast. Because of the short format of the podcast, I couldn't include the full interview, so this video is the complete interview. Hope you enjoy. Today's guest is Marco Ayala. He's a process automation professional with over 25 years of experience working in petrochemical facilities where he designed, engineered, and maintained process automation, safety systems, and integrated networks. He has expertise with safety systems, advanced process control, enterprise historians, and industrial network security, where he worked with enterprise IT to implement a corporate PCN security solution. Marco is active in oil and gas, chemicals industry, maritime domain, including offshore facilities. His passion in security efforts include cybersecurity and working alongside with asset owners, federal, local, and state entities in the endeavor and obligation to protect critical infrastructure and national assets. Mr. Ayala is a certified cyber trainer for ISA, International Society of Automation. He is also a member contributor of AMSC Gulf of Mexico Maritime Security Cyber Panel, InfraGard member, and chief of the Maritime Cross-Sector Council for Ports and Terminals. Here is Mark talking about his journey into industrial control systems and security.
So usually being an instructor, I speak to students in live forum, face to face, typically. And so I always get asked, where did you start? Where did you get your start into security? And it really actually stems from where I started very young into electronics. And so, I branched from electronics, and then I took some schooling, got into process technology, which is for operations. And then from operations, I went into instrumentation. So I worked for a large chemicals company here in the US based in Houston. And so, a lot of my students always ask me, how do you get started? Well, it started there at instrumentation and in electrical. So I went from instrumentation, electrical, started to work with the PLCs, the programmable logic controllers, then took some classes, some vendor-specific courses for the distributed control system, took batch training and also configuration training. But on top of that, HMI design and graphics. So it was a training a curriculum through my career to where the company that I worked for was, when I got back from the training, they put me to task. So, hey, you just took batch, go configure our recipes and our formulas for this new product line that we have. So I go through that, and security was never a question. It was always, make the product, do the products right. Safety is number one. Production is number 1.1 is like what I always like to say.
Yes.
And so that went on. So HMI design, and then I started, went off and took some training for the safety systems that we had at the site. And so I was also doing safety instrumented functions, and then that branched off. And then before you knew it, I was also the historian person that was handling the site process historians, and so that actually ventured off to where I was for the U.S. I was the PI guy, the OSI PI guy, which is
was that the time when you went into like network security?
That's where the rubber paved the highway for me, as far as the connectivity goes, because I at that time, especially with communications with OSI and PI and the historian, that was really the only connectivity that we had to the enterprise. There was no DMZ there, like we have now, and so when I got into security, it was overnight. It was one of those, we cannot get to the historical data, we cannot get our environmental data, we don't know where we're at in our lab data. And so overnight, I had to learn how to and work with IT, the security side. And so, I had a really good group of folks there at the site. And so, we started implementing security. So, and that was new to me. I didn't come from the traditional information technology piece. I came from the before they called it OT, the industrial control system space.
Okay.
So my first taste of it was in the early 2000s, where we actually had a historian that served up our historical data at the site that was breached, unavailable, and it was an internal denial of service. IT security was able to determine it was localized machines across our flat pan domain. You've got to understand, a global company
flat network,
flat pan network. Wow. So they were able to determine that, yes, we were getting denial of service from our own sites in Peru, Chile, Sweden. And so when I asked them, well, who are they? And they're like, well, we don't know, but they're authorized machines. They're on our network.
So it was just misconfigured machines?
Misconfigured machines, but somehow they were able to get authentication to the historian. So that freaked us all out. And that's where I really put on the security hat. Again, this is early 2000s. And so I made security priority number one. So we were able to restore the historian, get things back up and going. And we really started that defense in depth model. And so, and this was in the early stages of ISA 99, the committee and so forth. So I started going to the industrial control systems joint working groups. I actually attended in 2009 the 5-day training, the red team, blue team in Idaho National Labs. And that was an excellent training. So this thing that happened earlier in the early 2000s, that I was telling you with the historian, I had several years before I went to INL, so we were able to get security measures put into place, and we had, rolled out like an industrial defender solution at the site. And so we were doing security pretty, what we thought was, cutting edge, bleeding edge, maybe at some points. And what we found out is when I went to Idaho National Labs, within the first 4 hours, the Mark Fabro was my instructor. And within the first 4 hours, my jaw dropped, and I was calling the site saying, hey, we probably need to disconnect this unit, and this unit, because I kind of went in with a chip on my shoulder thinking, hey, we're secure. Well, there's nothing new that these folks here at Idaho National Labs can't, teach us. I think we're ahead of the curve. And unfortunately, when I got there, I was handed information. I was like, oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, we need to rethink this. So fortunately, I was able to go to that. So how I got into security was, I guess, the School of Hard Knocks way, and learned the hard way. But the venture has been, working on, the defense in depth strategies, putting things in place, host intrusion, network intrusion detection, putting in fences and perimeters to be able to do the detection piece. Yes. And so, fortunately, I was able to become an ISA certified instructor. I participated in creating some of their training materials. ISA is the International Society of Automation. Yes. And so I've actually been fortunate enough to train hundreds and hundreds of students from all over the world here in the U.S., coming into the U.S. for training, and also 3 years running for the National Guard Cyber Shield.
Sure, that's, I think, another great initiative.
It's a big bucket list for me, is to train. And let me tell you, we've got some very, very fabulous star players in our military when it comes to security. What's nice is I'm able to show them what a PLC looks like, what it does, how it operates, what are the low-hanging fruits that people often miss in securing these devices, and in case if you have to go in and secure these things or get them back up and running, what are the first tasks in line of what you need to do. So that's how I got into security. I don't know if that's
a pretty impressive story, in the sense that you had to start at a very basic level, where you said you had like a single network, flat network, and how was it interfacing with the IT in those days? What kind of challenges you had faced then, and when you compare that to, I guess, some of the challenges OT folk face now with IT, were they very similar or was different?
Well, I think it was still very young in its infancy. There was no real convergence of the IT OT talk that we have, for the last 5 years or so. But in the early days, it was trying to obtain a static IP address from IT, and knowing the folks and really working the relationships, but having to define why it's needed and so forth. But things have changed. Back then there was. We really didn't have DMZs out at the site. We had different manufacturing units. We had multiple reactor areas. We had, in a typical specialty chems plant, you've got a lot of things going on. You've got boilers. You've got, thermal oxidizers. You've got scrubbers. You've got all these different things. And all those were not on flat networks. They were subnetted into to being able to get to a historian. So the historian was the major pivot into all of these systems. And so working with the IT side to get infrastructure in place for that, and putting in a DMARC, because there really wasn't a DMARC at the time. So, but this was almost 2 decades ago. So things have really have changed, especially in the control systems and safety system space. I've been around a long time to know a lot of the key players at some of the vendors, because for one, where I was at, we had to talk to the vendors, so we knew the Emersons, the Siemens, and so it's talking to them in the early days, saying, hey, we really need your CPUs, your actual controllers, to have more security baked in, and although they agreed, many of the vendors at that time early on said, we're a control systems company. We're not really an IT security company. So if we put all these measures in at the controller level, that's going to increase, CPU loading, and that's really going to take away from the bandwidth and the horsepower of scanning and doing all the control system and advanced process control mechanisms.
Yes. So
they really pushed back at the time and said, hey, from a security standpoint, that's outer perimeter. That's on you. Right. And so now in today's realm, security is not only options, it's services from vendors, and you've got third-party remote support connected times all the time.
Yeah, I think the switch is flipped, where I think the more responsibilities on their shoulders also versus just the customer.
And the technology's changed too. The horsepower, in the early days of what these PLCs or the actual DCS hardware had, we're fairly limited.
Yes.
And now the horsepower, like this, this S7 1500 is taking, a lot of horsepower, comparable to even the bigger systems from that same vendor.
Right.
And so just the technology has changed. We're doing a lot more with less space and more horsepower.
Yes, and I realized that also with computing power and virtualization, which was only seen as an IT side of things, is now moving, it's already moved into the OT side. Right. And a lot of folks are virtualizing their environment. And that kind of concerns me because, if you go talk to somebody in IT, they have those lessons learned from the early days of their virtualization. And when you think about, it's a really nice school tool for the OT folks to have in terms of, spinning up a VM when you need it, having high availability and all of that. But then with the recent news in the Sunburst and VMware and Microsoft and all of those vulnerabilities, now you're basically getting it as closer to your OT environment, these risks.
Yes.
So what do you say to that? How do you what do you tell somebody in OT to be mindful of? What are the things that we need to be looking at?
So technology is wonderful. It's how you use it, how you utilize it. I come from a discipline of the process engineering side of the house. So safety is always paramount. Safety is number one. So when we start talking about digitalization, connectivity to the cloud, and having all these new the virtualization piece. These are all well and good. And I think from a structure standpoint, they should be utilized. And from a security piece, you should know how those are connected inbound and outbound. One thing, your safety system shouldn't be connected to the cloud. These are just some practical from a process safety standpoint. Connecting your safety system to an external network for the sake of security for monitoring in a traditional island system is not really something that's desired, and that's my professional opinion. Because I know a lot of these systems have been converged for many years now. The thing is that there's so much skin in the game when it comes to having the safety system. So I think the more open connectivity we have on these public networks that were not ever designed for infrastructure such as power, utility, connecting refineries offshore, from wind farms to even platforms offshore, using public backbone, it's not the right thing to do. Now, so with that being said, if you're looking at your external threat actors, or what I like to say is the internal threat actors are just as scary, and some of the times it's accidental, non-intentional. Yeah, and so we do have the external threats, and the internal threats are just as real, and a lot of the insider threats are even more real. So what I like to say is keep your control system buried deep down. Defense in depth strategies. You're going to use virtualization. Does it need to speak out to the cloud? Does it need to speak out to a public network? Probably not. Being able to isolate your system as far as having an IRP, an incident response plan, yes. Making sure that you can actually isolate from the DMARC to the enterprise, having something in place to be able to do that. Maybe changing your architecture and infrastructure. Obviously, the Sunburst and this later, last piece of threats, it may have changed a lot of things of how we deploy our architecture.
So you talked about incident response plan, and what have you seen in industries where IT has something already set up, because they've been doing it for a while, but with the OT, it's just a checkbox. Do you have an incident response plan? But that's pretty much what I have seen, where it's not very detailed. What have you seen in terms of incident response plan for the OT?
So I've seen some really good incident response plans that are like your 15, 20 pager, tells you who to call, to what switch rack to go to, what switch room to go to, and what cables to pull, to just 1 or 2 pages of here's who you call, and this is some of the best practice. So it depends. What I can tell you that I talk to our maritime partners in our MITSA facilities is working with your IT in your IRP, but build an IRP that both the IT and OT can come in and say, this is our DMARC, this is where we need to shut off, and maybe not just logically, but physically. Without impacting safety, without impacting production, you should have an ability to do that and test that at all times. And you really should. If you think about it, if you cannot disconnect from IT's infrastructure locally on your site from an operational standpoint and run safely, then you've got an architecture and engineering problem, honestly.
Yes.
And so
that's being a big challenge, because I see a lot of companies, outsourcing, or I don't know if the right word is, but like their firewall guys are somewhere, in another country, because their service providers are, overseas. And so logically controlling something is not quick. And I definitely agree with you on the physical aspect. You need to be able to get in there and turn it off and be confident that when you turn off whatever, that switch, firewall, whatever you're cutting off, shouldn't affect production. I think somehow gets left out, even though it is so critical.
So there's
planning.
So there are some tier 1, tier 2 facilities that I've worked in that have actually got they're using, for example, they went by the NIST 882 regarding parallel diodes. or not diodes, I'm sorry, parallel firewalls.
Okay.
And so, or paired firewalls is their term. So where you're using vendor A for one firewall and vendor B for the downstream firewall. And so, which is really good because from that standpoint, vendor A could be your remote third party somewhere sitting, overseas, like you're talking about,
Yeah.
where the second one that's downstream is the actual operational technology engineers, to where they could lock that down logically.
Okay.
But I have seen and worked in tier 2 facilities where they've also put in physical switches, hand switches, AB type switches, to
Okay.
where they can truly isolate the connection up to that top firewall. And so it just depends. How far do you want to go? If with this current situation right now, there may be some plants that are probably saying, "Hey, we should go ahead and engage these until we know more."
Right.
Again, if by doing that you have to shut down, then you need to rethink your engineering pieces of that. That's why it's important to maybe have your local historian below the DMZ, right?
Yeah.
And then that way, all your data is being historically kept. So, from a environmental standpoint, being able to push out reports,
right?
You should have that.
Keeping records, you have
all of that is still contained. Everything else, inbound, outbound, is executed. It's terminated. So, and you should be able to do that. Now, if you for those that are out there, if you say, well, if we did that, we don't even know what would happen. You need to start figuring that out. You need to start mapping that out. You need to start understanding what that would affect, and know that, right? Especially if you're doing peer-to-peer systems and you're using your enterprise domain as some type of backplane hub. Even if you're encrypting the data, it's not widely accepted practice in the engineering communities.
Sure.
Anyway, so those are some 2 cents there that kind of goes back through memory lane. And here lately, I'm actually sector chief for InfraGard for the maritime community here in Houston, Galveston, and also recently I'm the co-chair for the Area Maritime Security Committee for the Outer Continental Shelf for offshore platforms and drilling. And so one of our big things that we're going to be working on is cyber security on from the operational side, but also the IT infrastructure. And getting people engaged, even to the physical security piece.
Yes. Tell a little bit more about InfraGard for my audience here. Some of the audience are probably just starting out in cybersecurity, and then there are some that are already kind of seasoned professionals. But how would you introduce InfraGard, and what does it do?
So InfraGard is a public-private partnership, federal partnership with the FBI, and so typical requirements are, you have to be a U.S. citizen or here in the U.S. And so what that partnership allows is that we can get good communications back and forth from this partnership in regards to threats and in documents like TLP green, information that's relevant or pertinent to the industry you're in. So there's different groups. So there's the maritime, for example, domain that I represent. There's the oil and gas and chemical. CSC, as they call it, the Cross Sector Council. So it really is a strong partnership with FBI here locally.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the maritime part of it, where I know last couple of years there has been a lot of changes in terms of regulations and what is expected of like a chemical plant to have. Talk a little bit about what are those changes and what really happened there.
So for many years now, Coast Guard has been really looking at cybersecurity. And so they've recently, earlier this year, pushed out the what they call NAVIC. It's national. It's the 120 is the number on it. And basically it's a circular that pivots in for facilities that are MITSA regulated. And so what that really is pushing towards is that chemical facilities and terminals and ports need to be able to have in their physical security plan annexes with cyber in regards to cyber for anything that's computers and networks. So traditionally, guns, gates, guards, dogs, those type things have been in facility security plans and are inspected annually. So one of the key components that has been missing, but has been the cyber piece and making sure that you are documenting your vulnerabilities. And vulnerabilities could be third-party remote access to, like, for example, like you said, you may have to put in a help desk request that may go overseas to another country, where and it's really hard to vet those people that are sitting over there or what their intentions are. So you have to look at that. So just understanding your vulnerabilities is something new to be put into it. Now, it's not really new to the MITSA piece. Communications and networks have been somewhat already put into that, but the NAVIC kind of highlights more defined information within the NAVIC.
Okay. So I'm guessing all of our field security officers are now having to deal with cyber, information and how that affects. So, I can see kind of like a skills gap there, meaning with the cyber thing related, how is that? How would you go about filling that gap and having that concise, that information exchange?
So what's neat is, with the InfraGard, the maritime group that I'm in, is really getting the facility security officer, who's traditionally, physical, again, cameras, gates, badging, and bringing them into our discussions and giving them some cyber education, some cyber 101, and helping them, to become the cyber FSO. You got to understand, with the Coast Guard putting this onto the FSOs, many of them don't care to be cyber people. That's really not their game. But now that it's on them, they at least need to have enough information and knowledge and know-how to not just talk to the inspectors of the Coast Guard, for example, or regulators, but also to talk to folks like you in the IT and the OT side to be able to say, hey, how do I interpret this, right? And so a lot of the elements in our discussions are the jargon, the definitions, and some of the topics that are typically and traditionally done. Remote access, access control, system hardening. What does that mean? So I think it starts with the dialogue and in getting also some training, getting folks trained that are traditional, physical security officers, and getting them just some basic cyber. I don't like the term hygiene, but cyber training.
Yes.
So some basic knowledge there, but really to formulate a communications with folks like yourself, and be able to put that into their plan. Documenting their vulnerabilities and having a roadmap, what that roadmap looks like to remediate if it's even possible.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of talks, when you're talking about the DCS or the OT vendors back in the days when they said, oh, that's not our job. Cybersecurity is what you do. We do control systems. And it's very similar kind of conversation with, I think, all the other areas in a plant, for example, now with the FSO, the field security officer, going, hey, well, my table's already full with things, I need to deal with the cyber stuff. That's not my thing. So I think, like you said, it's just a eye-opening for everybody that everyone is actually involved in this collective piece called cybersecurity. And I think it's organizations are still trying to understand who needs what training, but then, like you said, what kind of training are we talking about? Are there any training that?
So there's a lot of different trainings that are out there, but for specifically, I like to refer to some of the top tier ones that we know. For example, ISA has got the industrial cybersecurity training, so they've got several modules there that are both in-person boot camp style and also virtual, so like a virtual training. Also, SANS is a very, very good training for the OT side and the IT side as well. They've got a lot of certifications also into the ICS space. So both are really, really good, and they complement each other. One may be standards based, the other one may be blue team, red team based, but I think those are the top tier ones. When it comes to the FSO type training, I think those are still being, built, as we speak. So I think you'll start seeing those more in 2021.
Yes. And I
Because
think,
you have to keep in mind, there's more than just your standard IT stuff. Being able to talk about OSI models and stuff to an FSO is probably not what they're there to really learn.
yes.
So breaking down the top pieces from a what could be vulnerable to even standards, both IEC type standards that a site might use or NIST standards, but also talking about TWIC, talking about uh, you know uh, Coast Guard initiatives and so forth
Yes.
for the FSOs in that industry. So
Right. And I think one of the things that I've seen kind of working, when you want to introduce somebody into the cybersecurity, lingos or terms that we use and our practices is do like a walkthrough with them every month. If you have a big area, just get the folks that are interested or needs to learn some aspect of it. Just walk through with them and find all of the items that needs to be fixed or
right.
just do that with them, and then you're talking with them, and that's when you're learning. And I have actually learned a lot of things like that, which is non-cybersecurity related, which is mostly physical security, and I think it can go both ways. So I think that's one of the ways we can kind of start at least creating awareness in organizations.
And that's very true, Durgesh. And what I was going to say too is that operations at the site facilities, your facility security officers, and those are your first line of physical defense, and so they need to be able to understand some of the risks. Portable media is out there, so being able to look at whether a contractor is bringing in a laptop, USB storage media, all these things could have impact to operations. So they need to be able to understand what to look for, how it can be used, why it's important to ask the right questions, and to get a feel for what type of work is going to be done before that person enters into the facility. So from a cyber piece, we have to be very cognizant of what we're letting in from the unseen network into our facilities. And we always have to be cognizant of those connections and those, and the folks that could be coming in. So.
Okay. So one of the pet peeves, we've kind of talked about this before in our previous engagements. So one of the pet peeves I have with security is the use of USBs. Now, I have used USBs and I continue to use them on certain levels, but definitely maybe not on our safety systems, but we still have the need for USB. So what do you tell folks who say USBs can't go away? Is there an alternate for that, or you think we should use USBs but with certain things in mind?
There are definitely options, and I know of some critical asset owners that have done a couple things. Some asset owners that have utilized removing all USB usage completely, and using secure network drops for being able to get applications and also to send their backups and data to where IT is involved from a security standpoint. And then I've also seen companies that that have created very good, very strong USB portable media document procedures, and I can tell you that those seem to work. One of the big parts with portable media is making sure that you know what portable media you have, what portable media exists that is in your usage, and documenting those, and having a good plan in place, and also being able to scan the USBs without infecting your system. Because I've been out on facilities offshore where we've taken a pristine, brand new stick that even the client supplied, and went through it, completely wiped it, and we were able to go out to the system, the control system, put it into the system, be able to get the files that we needed for our assessment, and then going back to rescan that same stick within the system from the IT side, the security side, found that the system already had viruses. So it's a two-way street.
Crazy.
So
Yes.
it is crazy. So what I've seen work is that I have customers that have deployed, purchased secure FIPS 140 dash 2, I believe, secure
Okay.
sticks.
Uh-huh.
And they're serialized. And so they've got serial numbers on them. So in their policies and procedures, they specifically state these sticks never leave the facility. They never leave the site. When you're going to do a backup or use this portable media, when you go into the control room, you need to log your name, the date, the time. Then you have to also write down the stick number, the serial number being used. So you have some trace, and they digitize that. So when you go into a work order, the work order already specifies what serial number is used, and the files that were transferred, how they were scanned in and out, and and timestamp. So because portable media is very difficult to wean from, but who uses the portable media, how it's used, and how it's contained is very, very, very important. And there are some vendors that have come out with some very unique tools. I know.
I was going to ask you about that. So I guess that was my next question was, are there any good solutions out there that if somebody wanted to try, whether it is, I don't know what they call it now, but I know Symantec or a company probably changed their name now.
So there are many solutions out there. Some of the larger refineries and chemical plants that I've seen use vendor solutions. So for example, Honeywell has got a nice solution that is off of the process control network. It's not there. So what they utilize that machine for is just to scan USB before usage and after usage. So, and that machine actually, for example, stays up to date, stays patched, and usually resides DMZ or below. But again, not
I'm
on.
Guessing it has a direct connection to the internet. It has all the engines of wireless definitions, or does it go to the cloud?
No. So yes and no. It depends on the scenario. But what I've seen has worked is they keep the system up to date on frequent updates and patches.
Okay.
And so what they'll do is they'll open up the connection, be able to grab the updates, whether it's daily, weekly, monthly, and then be able to utilize that disconnecting from the internet or disconnecting from through the corporate domain to get an outbound connection. So it just it depends on who's using it and how they have it set up.
That's great. Cool. So I wanted to.
So as far as
go ahead.
I had a question as far as your pet peeve. What have you seen work
with the USBs? So I think being able to scan the USB in a isolated machine, which is not on the network, and being able to say it's clean and identify, if there was an issue with the USB, recording that, and then going back to the vendor and saying saying we can't use the USB, saying no to USB, I think, but then finding an alternate way to get that data or file or whatever you're trying to get in. I think you have to do that instead of saying, oh yeah, we're just going to use it because we have this, we have a few minutes left, we need to get this file transferred over. I think security can wait. You have to wait, have patience. And in companies we don't have a procedure like you were talking about, I think those companies and organizations should take note and because I think even though it's not widely used, I would say, in like IT, IT, I think systems, they're very well blocking these devices now. They can identify if you plug in a headset versus a USB, they are able to identify what devices these are. But on the OT side, our HMI stations or our engineering stations still are wide open, most of them, and you probably disagree with me because I guess depending on the organization and how they've implemented it, like the other day we talked about, it really depends on who's implementing what and how secure things are. But I still feel that people have this bypass mentality, saying, oh, I'm going to bypass it. because this is important. I need to get this project going or this FAT done, and they would just bypass certain systems, but not then come back and put it in order again. And so I think I would say I've seen a lot of the bypasses in my life, and I've started kind of disliking the overall use of USBs. But then I understand that it is hard to get away from a USB, especially for somebody making changes, configuration changes, want to move a file in and out. It's really easy to do that, but then it brings a lot of challenges,
Right.
like with the snicker net and other. I mean, there are so many things you read and watch on the YouTube, and there you can buy stuff off eBay nowadays, and you kind of think, okay, transferring malicious files is one thing, but then killing the whole system with plugging in a USB, that's a whole other deal, especially like a control system related component.
Which then also takes the physical aspects, right? You have to be able to access the environment. You got to be able to access the machine.
And I'm surprised sometimes when I hear or see things where those doors, when you can use a dust can, spray it, trigger the sensor, open the door, where the locks are not in standard, they're not in the right format, whatever, the deadbolt,
Right.
or it is a cabinet key that's actually still hanging in the cabinet versus
Those are
locked up somewhere. Small things like that, and then that kind of leads into you getting access to something that you shouldn't have access to.
right.
So yeah, that's my pet peeve on that, on the USB thing.
So there's one piece that I wanted to add it to my discussion on USB. If you're going to utilize the USBs and make it a policy and a procedure, and you give training to the folks in your organization that are going to utilize it, especially in the operational technology space, one thing to consider is application control whitelisting.
Okay.
And having that on the machines, we've seen that works in protecting malicious software, malicious Trojans from actually taking over a machine. So with that being said, so DLLs can't be swapped and so forth. So what I recommend is that have a multi-tiered approach on if you're going to utilize USBs and have particular users doing them, and then we're only going to use these particular USBs themselves that are traceable and trackable. They never leave the site, for example.
Yes.
And so you put that all in your policies, procedures, and your rollout. But also look at maybe running application control. Most of your manufacturing automation vendors support it.
Okay.
There's different third-party applications that they'll allow on their system, whether it's a distributed control system or even Historian. And what this application control whitelisting does is it locks down the machine. When you have a known good machine, you can lock the system down. And so if anything gets on that machine or introduced to that machine, they won't execute. And so now, that being said, the machine can still act as a host. So you can still drop the item onto the machine or what have you, but just keep in mind it won't execute. And that's what you're trying to prevent is the execution of a worm or malware or ransomware, let's just say. So some of the quick wins we see, a lot of the asset owners in oil, gas, and chemical is rolling out the application control and locking that in, and making sure that they have a good policy and procedure for portable media usage, and test it. And when I say test it, also look and go do a pull, monthly, and see, are the only USB drives that have been seen this particular model. And if you're seeing other models, then you've got some people that are not following policy.
Right.
Red flag, and then you need to discipline, and go from there. Because again, we're not mixing water paints that are biodegradable at atmospheric pressure. Mm-hmm. So especially in the world that you and I live in, is that there's a lot of consequences, both environmental impact, safety impact, and company impact. So people need to take it very serious. And USBs, portable media, are some of the big pieces. Physical security trumps everything. Make sure you have a good, solid practice there. Sure. And try to look at looking at application control. I think the cost has come down significantly. The vendors support it, It's a help to build upon the security in
Yes.
that defense in depth onion that we like
I
to
like
talk
that. Yes, defense in depth. I think that's the key word there in any
about.
kind of approach. We can. I was going to jump off this topic a little bit and go
Right.
into some training things that you're doing. With ISA 99.
So so with ISA, they've got some really good classes. They've also have some boot camps. So the industrial cyber courses that I teach are what they call the IC 32, IC 33, 34, 37, and there is a new one that is, and those four courses are particularly dedicated to the IEC 62443 standards.
Okay.
So those classes allow you to understand what a good program, what a good system of measures looks like in having a program and having from everything from governance down to what is good, but also what the standards say. So, there's many standards within the 62443. So these classes help understand which ones you should look at and what to follow.
Are these like tiered, like beginner, intermediate, or how does these different courses go?
It's so I wouldn't say tiered. I would say it is sequential. So you would want to start with the 32, which is an introduction into the 62443 set of standards. It kind of lays out how it is mapped out and talks about the relevant standards that are published within the 32. And then it also goes into the life cycle, which is the 62443 function, is the cybersecurity life cycle.
Okay.
For OT, and then so the 33 starts really getting into the assessment piece on how to assess, and then 34 and 37, those are what I like to say the hands-on pieces of the courses that provide you from a run and maintain to a engineering, testing, and monitoring type scenario. So it builds upon that. As first you learn the standard, what it's about, how it's put together, and how it falls in place. As far as and then the next ones move on through all the way to run and maintain. So
Okay, great.
yeah.
So if we wanted, somebody had to go look it up, we just go to the ISA website, isa.org.
Yes, you can go to isa.org and you look for the cybersecurity tracks. Again, the IC 32, 33, 34, and 37. And those are really good courses. And some of them are offered online, so you could do it as your pace. So the ISA IEC 62443 does have a cybersecurity certificate program with the four courses that I was telling you about. And those, again, the four courses walks you through the fundamentals, risk assessment, design and engineering, and then the maintenance specialist. So it's four certificates. And once you receive the certificates for those four classes, you test out, you get the ISA IEC 6443 cybersecurity expert. And so, and that is a certificate that you can, that many companies are looking to see that you have, especially in the OT space.
That is great information, Mark. I want to thank you, Mark, for
Sure.
your time. I look forward to again talking to you soon.
I appreciate that, Durgesh. It's always a pleasure talking to you as well. And the same holds true. I learned things from talking to you as well. And the key thing here, and that you and I are very much aware of, is training and educating the human. The interfacing piece of these systems, and getting that, not just awareness and training. Awareness and training are nothing without culture. And so the culture within a facility is very important. And so by doing podcasts and doing these things that you've done, you help people with that culture piece, because security is very important.